Welcome to the RD2BE podcast. Each week we sit down with a different registered dietitian nutritionist to showcase the diversity of opportunity in the dietetics profession. Our aim is to dismantle the notion that there is a traditional career path. I'm Carl Barnes, the registered dietitian behind the scenes of RD2BE.
And I am Jenna Warnock, the RD2BE host. Our RD guests share their stories, career paths, and advice to help students like us succeed in the profession. Welcome back to another week of the RD2BE podcast. I'm your host, Jenna, and we've been doing a lot of guest multi-series recently, like with Rayanne, with Trenton, just because we always like to continue conversations, and especially with dietetics, there's so many avenues that people with different experiences want to dedicate and really share and dive into with different episodes. And Kaitlyn is a perfect example. So Kaitlyn was on the podcast a couple months ago, and she shared her experience as a student representative on the Ascend board and how that experience really helped set her up as a dietetic student to being successful now as a dietitian. And she talked about how the transition was, and just feel free to check out that episode if you just want to know more about really just the normal kind of experience of switching from an RD2B to a dietitian, and where she shares the things that she wished she knew going in. And we are kind of continuing that conversation where that past episode really focused on, right when you start your first RD job and the thoughts that you have and kind of reflecting on being an RD to be. Well, now the next phase of that, now that Kaitlyn's kind of spent a couple more months in her role, she's had more ideas, more reflections, and now it's kind of shifting more towards, well, okay, now that I've spent more time in this job, what thoughts have I had change maybe since starting? Have I grown in things that I didn't expect? And really just kind of following the timeline of what someone who is starting their actual career as a dietitian might look like. And so, just as I talked about before, Kaitlyn, she got her RD credential from James Madison University's DPD program and graduate program, and she's served as the Ascend student representative, which is a great opportunity if anyone's interested. But she'll be sitting down with us to talk about how her job's been so far. So, Kaitlyn, thank you for joining us again.
Yeah, thanks, Jenna. It's good to be back. I was like, dang, we really are like real life. Like this podcast gives me kind of an opportunity to like reflect a lot. So it's selfishly as much for me as it is for the audience. It's kind of like I was like, oh, it's kind of like a little podcast audio biography, kind of. The day in the life or like the phase of the life. So I'm glad people are following, and yeah, I hope it's super helpful. For sure. And
Yeah,
ditto on the Ascend student rep. We just concluded and we picked our next student rep for the next term, but I don't know when application's open for it, but for the next time. But yeah, I'll always encourage for everyone that's listening and you're a student to please reach out and apply.
Yeah, definitely. Shameless plug all the way because
Yeah.
yeah, great experience. And I'm glad that you mentioned how it's kind of instead of a day in the life, it's like a phase in the life of being a dietitian. And also, I think making it more real because I think, there's a lot of guests I have on this podcast where they're presidents of huge organizations and they've run these multi-million dollar companies. And I feel like they're absolutely great for wealth of advice, knowledge, and they've had such unique positions to offer great insights into the profession. But there's always just real life as well, where most people don't graduate and become a dietitian and then they become president of an organization the following day. People start somewhere. And so I think it's really great that we have you here to glean more insight into what it looks like, especially in the beginning. And so kind of segueing into that, do you have any big fears and worries that you experienced when you went into your first job?
Okay, that's a good first question. By the way, if you can get me, if anyone knows like any jobs that's hiring for a big CEO right off the bat, I mean I'd love to make like $1 million right after college. So first off, so I'm searching for that. So I'm gonna put that out there. But regarding like big worries and fears, I really was just afraid of mostly like the unknown. I didn't know what to be afraid of. I'm gonna be completely honest. You're kind of just throwing yourself out there. You're in a brand new brand new environment. Like you're out in the wild, wild west, basically. So something I really reflected on is like, I know we talked about imposter syndrome a lot in our previous episode. So that was one of my biggest fears still while, before transitioning into a role as an RDN. During my whole first 6 months, I can definitely say I talked about it in our first episode, but it definitely was present. And it still kind of is still leading into those next 6 or 7 months of my job. I was also afraid of not, and of course, like you don't have a preceptor to fall back on. You are the ultimate decision maker, and that kind of scared me because I saw a lot of reassurance from preceptors, and I'm someone that seeks a lot of reassurance in general. Even though I was right or I made the right decisions, just like having that second person to be like, are you sure this is right? It's right, right? Like that kind of thing. And then also just not, I was afraid of not knowing certain things. And for other people, like my coworkers, to think maybe I was unqualified. I was really afraid of being unqualified. And then of course, I touched on earlier, just I was afraid of I was afraid I wasn't going to build working relationships well. I was afraid I was not going to acclimate to my environment or my job well. So those are the two biggest things. I was just afraid of everything. So just like anything and everything, I literally was, because it was all unknown to me. And I think as humans, that's what we're always afraid of the unknown. So I'm not gonna lie, I'm very raw too. This was it's not exactly a walk in the park to transition. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think now this is kind of a side question, like that fear of the unknown and what the different work environment looks like, whether or not you'll acclimate to that work culture. Did it feel similar to when you had to acclimate to like the dietetic internship, that similar fear of the unknown, or did this one feel different from that?
Well, absolutely. It has a similar feel. For each site I went to, there was that fear, that first day fear. I just would feel like for the first day on the job, it has a little bit of a different feel because there's no one there waiting for you to orient you per se. You're expected to be the person. You're not meeting like you're not meeting a preceptor. You're not going to go through all this fluff and orientation. You're going to like hit the ground running. We're going to have some, obviously, and a good job. I don't want to, so like in a good job, you're going to have some orientation. I don't want people to think you're just going to get thrown in, but kind of like in a way, like you're walking in the expert instead of the other way around. You're going in to learn from an expert. So I do think that in general, like those even I relate it even when you first start college for the first time, like your freshman year of college, I can totally, because like you're going into this new environment, this fear of the unknown, like a different structure than what you had in high school. So those kinds of transitions all kind of have the same feel, they just have different, I guess they just kind of have different like circumstances or different little nuances to them. So,
Yeah. And it
yeah.
sounds like the biggest difference this time around was exactly what you said. We're not having a preceptor to lean on, but I think, just how you mentioned, like the support doesn't, maybe it's again just the shifting circumstance where instead of having support from a preceptor, it's having support from your supervisor or support from your
Mhm.
boss or support from family members with the transition. Um, and just, similar to that situation, adapting based off of what resources you have and how things change.
Yeah, the support of your supervisor. I'm glad how you brought that up because like the support, it's not like you don't have a lack of support
Mhm.
throughout. Like it's like, your preceptor and your dietetic internship. It was your professors when you were doing your DPD or your knowledge or your 4 years of college, right? But so that's why you have to also make sure that you land a job with like great supervisor support because then you're really going to be left kind of out there, right? So that's just a little piece of advice that I have that reminded me when you said something about supervisor is I think that can make or break a first job, to be honest, as a new RD, is who your supervisor and support is.
Yeah.
Because you need it. You need it.
Definitely. And that just makes me think of, because I'm just in a PhD program right now, how people say your advisor, like your PhD advisor, makes
Oh
or
yeah.
breaks your program experience. And at least for me, when it's like, oh, well, then how do you parse out what a good advisor is? Um, at least on my end, it's you meet with them before you commit, or try to do research to see what the work
Mhm.
culture is like before going in. And, like for me, I did a lot of my research before committing, and I was like, yes, this feels right. Would you say it was the same for you? Like, did you get to know what the work culture was like going in, or was it kind of blinded? Did you just hope that the supervisor was okay?
I'm not gonna lie, I kind of went in like not knowing, and I don't think that that was because I don't think that was really when you work. See, I personally work for a contractor, right? So you're kind of just subject to wherever they put you, you know? So it was really hard for me. I didn't really get a preview, right? I was kind of like accepted the job and got oriented at the facilities when I was already hired, right? So I didn't get like kind of a preview. I got like a by mouth over the phone review of what these places were like. But again, I had the added element of I had no idea what the places, I had no idea really how the culture was.
Hmm.
So acclimating to that was a whole different ball game. Um, but honestly, it all kind of like 7 months later, it all kind of turned out to be fine. I mean, like you just don't like you psych yourself out, and like the biggest thing is you have to like expect things to not be fine. Like you're not going to be fine, honestly, like when you're first starting your job. And because I don't want to set the expectation that like oh, it's easy peasy. Oh, it's no big deal. You have your RD credential, you have the knowledge, you're equipped, you're ready to go. You graduated with your master's, you're ready to go. I mean, not necessarily. I mean, like it was speaking from experience, I was not fine. The first 6 months of my job, I was not fine. So just being transparent about that too. So,
Yeah.
but
And it's just knowing that, and I think it's kind of changing the framework of saying that, oh, it wasn't fine from a negative to the acceptance and the reassurance that it's okay to not feel okay in the beginning because it does
exactly.
eventually get better. And I'm glad that you mentioned where it's like, oh, yeah, you have all your credentials, all your knowledge going in, but that's very much not the case because you have so many new things to learn. And so for you, what was the biggest unexpected learning curve that you had?
Honestly, it had to do with personally because, like, learning how to be yourself again, honestly, was my biggest learning curve in finding yourself again. Um, when I first started, in my first 6 months, I kind of went through this whole phase where, like, you don't really know who you are anymore. You kind of like lose a sense of identity because of this unknown journey you've started. Um, you don't have the supports. Like everything's changed. Everything got flipped upside down. And now you're just expected to pivot, adapt, and deal with it. Um, Personally, like I graduated from JMU. I lived in Harrisonburg like my entire life. Um, in May, right after graduation, I moved up to the DC metro area with my fiance. And then I started my first job all at once.
Wow.
So that I know I got that reaction a lot. Wow. Like, so it was a lot. And at the back of my mind, I feel like I was still riding the high of graduation, kind of. I was riding the high of like being in a new area. But then the job, and then getting the acceptance to the first job, right? I was like, oh, everything's gonna be great. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be great. And then like you actually start the job and you get like a couple months in and you're past that orientation phase. And then it kind of just hit me like a ton of bricks, right? So I went through a lot of ups and downs. I didn't understand like how all of these transitions together. It was kind of a delayed effect. Because I didn't have the high from graduation really. I was kind of removed from that. I was kind of removed from my move, this new area. Um, and I was kind of hard on myself too. Like I was like, I should really be acclimating to this faster. You
Mm.
know, I was really hard on myself I would say those first 3 months, really for sure. Yeah, because like you really want to be able to handle it all at once because you think you should be able to.
Mm.
Um, and what really helped me is like, you have to allow yourself time if you're in that same boat. And even just a job in general, even without the move, without the graduation, like you have to have, there's a grief that comes with it, right? Like the post-college grief is real. You should Google it and look it up. Because when I like searched Google and I was like, is what I'm feeling like valid question mark? And I had this whole rabbit hole of like people having like post-college blues or like post-college transition. And like I read more into it and I was like, oh, this is like a thing people experience, you know? So that kind of helped me. And then the biggest thing I took away from it is you have to allow yourself to feel, and process the complex emotions that come with huge transitions like that. Um, so you just have to be honest with yourself also and like where you're at, you know,
Mhm.
uh, and like also lean in and rely on those older supports that you formed already, right? And trying to make some new ones also. And because I know making new supports in the area really helped me, meeting new people, a few coworkers here and there, it just that's all the stuff that really helped me. Um, that's the biggest thing is like leaning in and relying on your older supports, but then also making some new ones as well to kind of make it a little easier.
Yeah, because it's that balance of like, yes, having the older support because they're like solidified and you have someone that you know to trust to hold on to for like that
Mhm.
support, but also not forgetting how you do need to like
Yeah.
root in and embrace how, hey, this is a new transition and I need to still invest in my present moment so that
Yeah.
then my future self can rely on the support that I'm currently making in the present now. And I'm so glad that you mentioned how you were, the judgment that came with the transition, because that I feel like then that only makes the transition harder. Because
It
if you're
made it so much worse.
simultaneously, yeah, if you're simultaneously judging yourself while trying to process all of these things happening, it's just makes it 10 times more difficult because then you just have an added layer. And so I'm glad that you highlighted, it goes back to what we were saying about accepting that it's going to be hard. That I
Mhm.
think comes in turn with releasing some of that judgment because you were kind of telling yourself it shouldn't be this hard. It shouldn't be this difficult. But if you just go from the get-go and accept, hey, it's going to be tough, but I'll get through it, that helps kind of ease some of that judgment, I feel.
For
Um,
sure. And I feel like people told me it was going to be hard. Like, I feel like my supports at the time didn't really, like, my older supports were like, I feel like they told me that somewhere.
mhm.
But I was just so elated on these highs that I was like, oh, I'm sure it's fine. I'm sure someone told me that it was going to be hard. I'm not going to be sitting here and be like, no one told me. Some people probably told me. So, like, yeah, I mean, I feel like I was thinking when I was preparing for this podcast, like advice question mark, like can I really like give solid advice right now on to someone that's going through this? Because
Mhm.
finding I'm still kind of going through the process. Um, but yeah, that's the biggest thing is I'm like, oh, well, maybe it would just help if people just knew that my experience, it just helps to know that like you're not alone. And when you have all these big transitions happen, this is completely normal.
Yeah, absolutely. And um every transition is hard. And you mentioned that like grief associated with the transition because what makes and I mean I've listened to loads of podcasts about like life transitions and things like that where you feel that grief because a part of you is still holding on to the past. And when the more separated you become from that past experience, like the harder or the more painful that grief sometimes feels, especially if you're still holding on to it. And it's perfectly fine to do that because that's part of the transition. Because you can't just go straight from college student to full-time working employee overnight. Like there
No.
has to be a transition period. And it has to be a little difficult because you have that identity shift.
Yeah.
Not to say difficult means bad or difficult means suffering. It's just difficult as in this is new, this is scary, but you'll get through it. And you've talked already about like really good advice for people that are starting their first career as a dietitian. And you've already kind of given some insights into what you would tell someone who is starting their first job, but are there any other things that you would want to tell your past self when you were starting your first RD job?
Um, First off, it's like I kind of said it earlier, it's not as bad as you think it's gonna be, because even when I first started in the first couple months, my fears had already settled a little bit because what I had in my mind before I started working was not what actually happened. Like I thought, like I felt comfortable being the source of information. I felt comfortable being the person. After a little bit, like that kind of went away. So it's not as bad as you think. It really isn't. As long as you give yourself time, it's not that bad at all. It all turns out those worries that you had are you kind of forget what you worried about, honestly. I definitely do. I forgot what I worried about at this point. But also at the same time, when you first get accepted, it's a milestone. It really is. So you should really take time to soak it all in and celebrate it. Um, because it still is like a milestone in your life, and you can make a positive out of it by just letting yourself be and cherishing that milestone. Um, there's going to be a lot of unknowns, of course, but hold on to what you can that's positive. Um, the one thing that I really got excited about sharing is like kind of when you're already in the job. Don't confuse being a new RD with the inability to have work boundaries. You don't have to earn your way into this profession. If you have an RD, you are an RD. You don't have to break your back to earn a spot on the team, right? Like you're already earned a spot on the team, right? So, learning professional boundaries early was a lifesaver for me because I really could not survive my job without it. I really couldn't. Um, you're literally in the profession, so don't feel like don't feel the need to earn more after your first job. Um, don't be in any group me or team chats or email threads with your healthcare team unless you absolutely have to be. And if you must, like I said, mute it, mute the notifications on your non-working hours and on the weekends for your own sanity. I know coworkers that don't do that, and I'm like shocked. Like, how do you not do that? Like, how are you still letting work infiltrate your phone on the weekends and at night? Like, how are you still doing that? I don't know. I don't know, but I'm telling everybody here to do that for their sanity. Um, One thing that's really helped me is like at the beginning of the workday, I have a focus block for like 90 minutes and I put it on my work calendar for all my coworkers to see. So if I have my door shut, don't come in. Like that's basically what I don't want to be rude to you and like turn you away and be like, nope, I'm really focusing right now. So that's something that really helped me also. Um, and then at the end of the day, you go home, but your laptop doesn't. I mean, like that's something I really started doing too. And it's gonna be there tomorrow. Your laptop's gonna be there. But it's not your buddy. It doesn't come home with you unless you have to. But like for me, no, it never really has to for me. Um, so, and then also just more importantly, like two really more important things I want to cover is like, don't let any other coworkers or people that you work with take your own self-worth and knowledge. You kind of own that, and that's something that no one should be able to take away from you, and you should not let anyone take it away from you. um so that I know that a lot of new RDs, like I was talking about earlier, kind of feel like they don't know it all, or they don't, they feel inadequate. They may not feel like they have the knowledge after all the clinical skills. They might still feel a little insecure, but what you're going to find out is a lot of your coworkers that have like been in it for a bit, they still don't know everything. And you'd be shocked by the things they still don't know. I kind of, I'm serious. Like you would be shocked, by some of the things that your coworkers still don't even know. So everyone's still learning. So I like to remember that. Um, And then also I went through a couple situations at work already within the first 6 or 7 months. I really want everyone to like walk away with this is like requiring respect from your coworkers is not being too much, right? I won't if I got into it, Jenna, I could go into it. Like I could give everybody on RD2BE audience like the tea. I could go into it. But addressing when someone disrespects you, like a coworker, is non-negotiable. Um People are gonna say you're gonna get gaslit for doing that by some of your coworkers, right? But that shouldn't be the standard. That shouldn't be universally accepted. That's not attractive, right? So that's the biggest thing is like setting all of those boundaries early on and being so non-negotiable about respect, being so non-negotiable about like this is my time, being so non-negotiable about like I'm not available. It's the weekend. I'm not available to answer or have any of these chats light up. So I don't feel like a lot of people also expect that from you as a new RD or an entry level practitioner. But once they understand, most people understand. So don't feel, I know it's hard. It was really hard for me to do at first. It was really hard to set those boundaries at first, but once I did, my job got 10 times easier. It really did. Um, so yeah, that's my big long like advocate for yourself.
Yeah, no,
So
definitely. And what do you think gave you the strength to kind of set those boundaries so early on? Because you mentioned how a lot of people have those feelings of needing to earn your spot before you can set those boundaries. So how did you of course, you still had these doubts and stuff, but how did you kind of bypass that to still set those boundaries early on?
I couldn't, it got to a point where like I came to terms that I can't do my job effectively if I'm dealing with XYZ. You know, I just can't do it, get it all done if I don't set these standards. And honestly, I would really encourage everyone to start doing this from day one because I didn't do this from day one, right? And so once you start doing it, but you hadn't been doing it, it can be a culture shock to a lot of your coworkers. And a lot of maybe like those quote unquote toxic coworkers will be like, oh, she's changed. She's kind of moody all of a sudden, or whatever they want to like frame you as. So it is better off for you to just start doing that early. So that's the expectation. Because there will be some people, if you do it mid, like 3 months in, they'll be like, what happened to her? She was so nice. She was so nice, like whatever. But it's not, don't confuse also with setting boundaries without being a nice person either. I mean, that's the one thing I had to also overcome was like, Kaitlyn, you are not being unreasonable. You are not being a mean person. This is not it's the workplace. These are all adults. If they think you're being mean, so be it. Okay. Like, but don't confuse that also with having professional boundaries too.
Yeah.
I
It,
think.
and I feel like when in that example, it appears mean. And again, this requires self-assessment because people can absolutely, you can be mean while setting boundaries, but you can also be nice while
Yes.
setting boundaries. So as long as you do that first step of self-awareness of, oh, am I doing this like nicely and respectfully?
Mm-hmm.
If there is still the accusation of, someone being mean, someone accusing you of being disrespectful, that's typically a sign of the other party, like being the not just like the disrespectful, the not so positive side, whereas you're the one that's being, respectful and considerate. And I'm glad that you mentioned like, hey, do it at the beginning with the awareness of, doing it respectfully, just as you mentioned, because it is honestly 10 times easier than trying to change midway through. But I also feel like, those are the types of things where you don't know until you experience it to make the change. So I think it's just something for people to be aware of going in of, hey, boundaries need to be something that I focus on. And then that'll help identify early on to, oh, I need to make sure that I have this off on the weekends, or I need to make sure, excuse me, that I focus on, you know, having this focus time where I can and communicating that with my coworkers. Uh,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's gonna be still people that are like, you just can't do that. you just can't do it. I was like, well, yes, you can. You can do that. Like, you can do it. It's funny because I talk about I mentioned the quote unquote toxic coworkers, but it's actually like the good coworkers that I've formed really good relationships with and I'm friends with outside of work and we hang out. It was those coworkers that started getting me to do the boundary setting stuff because they observed and they kind of sat me down and like, listen, you're not a bad person if you do XYZ. So I had really good mentors and they weren't RDs because I'm the only RD in my facility. It was like the MDS coordinator, it was the physical therapist, the speech therapist, you know. I had people just mentor me as a not as a dietitian, but as a co-worker and as a person, right? So they were witnessing things and they were telling me, hey, you can do this, you know.
Yeah, and I think it's so important that you mention that because I feel like someone hearing this from the get-go, they're like, oh, well, I'm going to silo myself. I'm going to get isolated if I set all these boundaries. But it's like, no, you actually set these boundaries because of the good people that you form that support. Exactly tying back to what we mentioned with forming present support to help you when you need it. And that's a real-time example of, yes, having your previous support help you through this new transition while simultaneously building support around you, because then that helps you with very like real time things that you need to address.
And I would say everyone on my team, like I have a really strong relationship with. It's like so I can be present in
Mhm.
the moment in meetings. Like I'm not working during meetings because I get that time at the beginning of the day to get my stuff together. Right. So it's like it does pay off dividends to where you can be focused on other things throughout the day, right? And your brain doesn't feel so disorganized. And you're able to be present with your coworkers and you're able to talk with them. You're able to like it's like I'm a very chatty person. Like I will literally go from like my admissions office because I work in long-term care in case anyone missed it. Like I go to my admissions office girl, I chat with her a little bit. I go to the therapy gym, I chart in there, I chat with my therapy girls for a little bit. You know, like I bounce because I like the social interaction at work. I just think it makes working a better place. And everyone, I know that the biggest piece of positive feedback that I've gotten is like, we always know you. We like we always see you out and about and we really like that. You know, you're like sometimes RDs I feel like can silo themselves in their own little world, but believe me, like the rest of your healthcare team like will notice like, oh, we always see you, you're always out and about, you're always doing XYZ, you know. So I do all of those things that I mentioned earlier and I still do this. You know, I still do you know, my normal like hopping throughout the day and like checking in on people and like being present in meetings. So you can do that and form really good relationships still with your coworkers. You're not siloing yourself.
Definitely. And I'm really glad that you have that experience firsthand to kind of dismantle a lot of preconceived notions that people may have. And you've already shared about a bunch of things that you've learned and uh knowing things that you still have to learn. And so are there things where, given your experiences and the things that you have been able to overcome, but also help you recognize where there's still some gaps? Are there things for sure that you're like, yeah, I am still working on this and I'm still working to
Yeah.
learn this?
Yeah, I feel like I haven't been even an RD a year yet. So I feel like I still have so much to learn and I'm in that phase of life theme again, like that phase of life where like I'm still like not I don't know what I don't know still, right? I'm still in that very much in that phase. But the first like the main thing that comes to mind is one thing definitely I'm still like learning, and this is vulnerable of me to share because I have a hard time sharing that I still have to navigate criticism.
Mhm.
Um, even if it's not real criticism, right? So many like members of your healthcare team, I'm just gonna say, will think they know what you do as an RD, but they really don't know what you do, you know? And so most of them don't. And so when they approach you with something that really isn't in your scope or like they just think they know more than you about something else that is within your scope. You know,
Mhm.
you get sometimes like unwarranted and inappropriate criticism at times. That's like where I'm referencing the criticism that's really not real, is where it's like, that's not even what I do.
Mhm.
You're completely wrong about the things that I do. Um, Even if like I said, I mentioned all my working relationships are solid, but I still kind of feel like when that criticism, whether it's real or whether it's like not warranted, it does take a lot for me because I'm naturally a defensive person because I value my own character, I value my work ethic, that's the things I value about myself. So I'm really quick to act in a very defensive manner, when I'm posed with like questions, when I'm posed with concerns, when like people are saying, why'd you do this? I think you should do that when they don't even know even.
Mhm.
Um, Something I've been really working through is like learning how to calm down, like, before you respond to people, take a second, collect your thoughts and like really focus on giving your rationale for what you do or how you're going to do it or your plan of action in a very, very rationale, like understanding, non-defensive tone of voice. Because a lot of the time people question things and people in your healthcare team question things because they don't understand
Mhm.
or they're just trying to learn.
Mhm.
They're trying to have interdisciplinary team at its finest and they're just trying to learn. So you're not trying to criticize my knowledge or my expertise. People just don't either know better or people just want to learn. So that's the one thing I've been navigating is how to not take everything, questions, comments, concerns as criticism on my expertise and knowledge and not coming across as defensive when I'm answering their questions. That's something I'm really trying to like. No one's told me like I act so defensive or brash sometimes, but like I've, I've, I've like, I've kind of like had my own self-awareness, like, oh, I shouldn't have answered them like that, you
Yeah.
know? Like, I shouldn't have been so defensive in that meeting or whatever.
No, yeah. And I think it's good how you also bring to light the, benefit of the doubt and people automatically being good intentioned because literally 9.9 times out of 10, that's exactly what they are. They just want to understand what you do. And you already mentioned it where a lot of people that you've come across, they don't understand exactly what's in your role and what you do. And so with the questions that they ask, it's mainly just a, hey, I'm trying to understand. And I think similarly, on the flip side, also opening the floor to, I'm sure that you've asked people questions where it's like, oh, like, what do you mean by this? And what do you mean by that? And I'm sure that the last thing that you've thought of when you've asked people that is, I'm going to poke holes in their, 6+ years of education and try to like snuff them out as far as
Yeah.
not knowing something. Uh, so I'm really glad that you highlighted that accepting criticism. And I feel like just with dietitians and dietetic students in general, we are like type A at heart and we want to be perfect and criticism. And I feel like because we strive to improve and strive to be good so much that when anything's questioned towards us, we take it towards criticism because we want to like it's almost a double-edged sword where it's we
Mhm.
want to be criticized so we can be improved to the best of our ability, but then that means that we almost seek criticism where it doesn't exist because we're on this huge wanting to be perfect, but then beating ourselves up
Yeah.
in the process. Um, so
Yeah. And the less things you take as criticism, yeah, the less you will beat yourself up, and the more you're just not emotional about something that doesn't even exist, you
Mhm.
know. I'm glad you mentioned like, yeah, I mean, everyone is there because they care about people.
Mhm.
They're not trying to beat you down either. Like these people, a lot of my coworkers are very empathetic. They're very understanding. They're not trying to beat you down.
Mhm.
They're just trying to understand. And so coming from someone that's just naturally defensive, it's been a lot to kind of counteract and correct, a lot of how I conduct myself sometimes. So,
Yeah, definitely. And how it's like always a journey of learning and recognizing the weaknesses that you had going in, but also knowing that every day that you encounter that, that's one step towards improvement and getting better.
yeah.
And so we've talked a little bit about the things that you still, have to learn, like accepting the criticism and responding, appropriately. Now, on the flip side of that, are there things that you feel like you've really kind of like dialed down, you feel confident in, it's kind of become systematic? Like, are there any things that you feel like, okay, I didn't have my footing in this at the beginning, but now I feel like I have a good footing in it now?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I feel like once you've been through 6 months of a job, you kind of know the ebb and flow in like the busiest times of the month, and you kind of expect, oh, I'm gonna be busy this part of the month because these things are due, but I'm not gonna be so busy this time of the month, so I can chill out here, kind of. So the organization and the routine of my work, I feel like I've really kind of mastered and gotten down. Not a lot of stuff gets by me, I feel now at work. Like I feel like I've kind of got that under control, the systems, the processes, um, and like honestly, the trust that like I was talking about earlier, the working relationships, most importantly, I feel like I've pretty much like built a good rapport with everyone, within reason. There's just some people at work you're just not going to get through to. I mean, that's just a fact. I feel like everyone kind of has that experience where it's just like, okay, I tried, we can just be coworkers. It's okay. Like, so there's going to be a couple of those, but I think for the most part, everyone trusts me. Rapport is really good. So I feel like that's stuff I've also mastered. I think more importantly, and the most important thing is I've learned through like the ups and downs I was talking about earlier. I mastered the ability to hold space for both success and challenges. So being able to say, this is how much I've learned, I've overcame, this is my success, celebrating wins. And then like even at my coworkers at this point, like I voiced them to people who I know that will care, and that's always fun to like, and that's part of that building relationships and rapport piece. Um, but then also at the same time anticipating challenges, and but just knowing that with challenges you can still enjoy success. Those two things can coexist. And that's really gotten me through 6 months of my first job so far. And I feel like that's just how you build security within yourself too. Like that constant, okay, I'm struggling with this, but I just mastered how to do that. So let's hold them both.
Hmm.
So we can still move forward, but still, build that security and that self-esteem and like that kind of rid yourself of that imposter syndrome and that self-doubt. That's something that I really feel like I've kind of gotten a handle on, just recently. So
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you mentioned, and I think this also helps with addressing imposter syndrome, is holding both the successes that you have and the challenges that you have at the same time, because you're absolutely right. You can be struggling in one department, but be like, no, but I'm doing like really well in this other one. And I think it goes back to celebrating those wins. And another tip in imposter syndrome too is just always having, a little drive of all your success, like really good papers that you've written or really
Mhm.
good just like accolades or things, just to remind yourself I can succeed while also struggle in other avenues. And I think that's
I
really
yeah.
reassuring.
I get such a high because we just had our in-person board meeting last week with the Ascend board, and I get such a high after I come back from those because that's like, oh, I might be struggling at these certain things in my job or whatever, but like this is something that still reminds me that like I mean, I'm not doing too bad, you know. So, and I get to be with these people. I'm really privileged to be in this room with people. So the meeting and the in-person meetings and my involvement with Ascend really gives me that like, oh, I'm not doing so bad. It
Yeah.
kind of gives me a lot of inspiration. So this week I'm definitely feeling yeah, I'm not doing too bad, I just came from this meeting and All my coworkers were asking about it, which felt really nice. Like they kind of know what I do outside of work. So and they thought it was really cool. So that was really awesome to see them take interest in that too.
Yeah, and I think that's further encouragement to get involved in organizations, whether it's Ascend,
Mm.
whether it's dietetics organizations, because that helps also like carve in your identity outside of work. You're outside of being a student, where it's like, hey, I'm contributing to the profession, not just with my full-time job. I'm volunteering, contributing, and making a place for myself. Uh, so that's really awesome to hear. And the last question I have, kind of tying everything together, I think we've talked about so many great things about finding your footing, navigating boundaries, how to be respectful, how to still, get support while leaning on previous support, letting go of past student, transitioning into, being a full-time employee. In your current role, and with what you've seen now, do you see yourself staying in this, like where you're currently at long term, or like with what we know with dietetics, it's very transitionary. Like, you
Mhm.
can be at one job for 3 years, hop the next, and that's not considered bad. That's considered like moving up or progressing.
How you
So
get a raise.
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So it's how
Um,
you get a raise. So
Yeah, you're exactly right. Like you're not gonna get nearly as big of a raise if you stay. And I've talked about this with Rayanne in our like salary negotiating episode
oh, that's perfect.
where
Yeah.
yeah, job opportunities where especially in dietetics, if you want to keep getting good raises, you have to go to other organizations and things like that. So in that same light, do you see yourself staying in long-term care or have you kind of just with the self-reflection see yourself growing in other areas?
So I know I talked about on like our first episode together that my long-term goal is to kind of loop back around to college and academia in that way. Um, but I do think that, I don't see myself like here in this moment long term. But I think what a first RD job does um, is very valuable. It settles your worries, it settles your anxiety about working in general. It gives you the basis for dealing with those unexpected challenges and setting those good habits and boundaries early. It shows you we were talking about growth, where you need to go. It shows you areas where you're killing it, but it also shows you areas and exposes your weakest points where you can use to just grow more into the future. You want your first job to be that baseline where you can still figure it all out, figure out who you are, establish what you're good at, and what you're not so good at, and what you need to work on to get to the next level. I know with long-term care, it definitely is a lot. So I will share that like I am going to transition into a part-time role in long-term care. And then I'm gonna endeavor into some nutrition counseling through telehealth through Nourish. I don't know if they consider this a plug for Nourish or not, but like I 100% recommend Nourish also to all the RD2Bs listening as a definitely a great option because they're super flexible and you can work part-time, you can work full-time. My process to onboard has been easy so far. I just wanted something after reflecting back on your last 6 months, you kind of also figure out what really works best for me and what do I want to delve into. I wanted to stay in long-term care, but I also did not want to be in the thick. I did not want to do that full time. It's a lot. It really is. Especially as a new RD, it's a lot. It's a lot for experienced practitioners for sure. Um, so I just decided to take that leap and hopefully, in another few months, I can come back with maybe a new installment on the podcast, like
Yeah.
another quarterly podcast about, oh, Kaitlyn's life update.
Mhm. Yeah, where it's
Um,
like, hey, 6 months in the telehealth space. What
yeah.
have you learned? And then at that point, it's like a year in long-term care. So it's like a
Yeah. So yeah, stay tuned for where that takes me. I haven't started yet. I start February 23rd in that, but like everyone always says, if you want to hear how this turns out, stay tuned. There's going to be another quarterly. Like, I think I'll definitely have some valuable, I think by that point also, um, valuable insights into the telehealth space as well, since I know that's a growing area of interest among RD2Bs. So,
Yeah, definitely. And I'm glad that because I think also accepting and transitioning, I think it was one right that you gave yourself enough time in long-term care to
mhm.
come to that decision. Like absolutely giving yourself time to really sink your teeth into your first job, figure out your strengths, figure out your weaknesses before you make that other transition of like, hey, I would operate better if this was part-time and then I did something else. Um, and I'm so glad that you brought up like everyone has a first job and you don't finish learning when you're done with school because your first job's entire job is to learn. It's just a different type of learning that's supposed to set you up for, decades of a career as a dietitian, but it could be in different avenues for sure, like how you're switching to telehealth with counseling. And so exactly what we've talked about before, not beating yourself up, releasing judgment in the sense of, oh, I should have done I should have done 3 years in clinical before deciding to transition to this other space. Like, no,
Right.
you can, as long as you're reflecting and as long as you're doing these like self, reflections of what have I learned from this? Am I learning everything that I can? It also helps you kind of parse out what you do want to do as a dietitian. And I think you've experienced that with what you're currently doing now. But any last things that you'd want to tell RD2Bs, or I'm so glad that we have been able to continue following your career and how it's been transitioning, but again, not in a negative light, but in a growth aspect where, you'll be able to
Yeah.
grow more into the role that you want to look for in
Yeah.
dietetics.
I do this just because I do this, and I tell people I do these, and I'm willing to keep doing these episodes because like I just don't want people, I don't want the listeners, or I don't want people that need to hear this information. I don't want them, I just want to make it better for the next generation, right? Like I don't want people to experience what I did to the degree that I did. So hopefully these are helpful. Yeah, I mean, and also just 6 months is enough time. You don't have to do 3 years in clinical. You don't even have to do a year in clinical to like find out whether if you don't like it or not. I don't recommend quitting after 3 months. Like that's something I don't recommend because then you're still in the thick of your emotions and like everything's terrible, right? So I do like suggest like maybe that 6 month and you can reassess and reevaluate. I'm definitely going to reevaluate 6 months from now, right? Like, is this still where I want to be? Kind of have like little check-ins with yourself. Like, am I doing what makes me happy? If not, like, how can we change that?
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you have then how can we change that? Like, what can I do?
Mhm.
Not having that stuck mindset of, well, I'm in this job and I can't leave.
I have to be here. Like, well, I really can't do anything. Yes, you can. You can do something about it. You
Mhm.
can.
Yes.
Something's gonna, if you feel like you can't do something about it, if you're still in that stuck, reluctant phase, believe me, you're gonna get to the point where something's gonna happen that's gonna catapult you to do something.
Mhm.
Really, it's gonna happen.
Yeah. And
You're
thinking,
not happy if festers long enough, and then one day you're just gonna be like, you know what, I can't. I'm gonna do something. So if you don't feel motivated to do anything, that's totally also normal because that was me for like months 5 and 6. I knew I wanted to make a pivot, but I'm like, I just I
yeah.
feel kind of comfortable now that I just finally got a handle on things. But then like something happened and I was like, let's do it.
Yeah, no, and I'm
I'll
glad
put that
that, and
stuff.
I think that's, leaning into the listening to yourself and not, because even when, you were like, oh, I'm getting comfortable, let's just like put this on the wayside. Something's gonna come up to make you solidify the
It
decision.
is.
So, yeah, but thank you so much for giving us a little update, but also like kind of giving real time. It's really nice seeing real time how becoming a dietetic student to a dietitian is, and the things that come along with it, and how you learn things differently about yourself, about working, about your knowledge, and that really, you never arrive at learning. It's always a lifelong process. And I'm sure we'll do episodes again in the future. But thank you so much,
Yeah.
Kaitlyn, for hopping on again.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me, Jenna. It's great to give, the listeners a real life. I think it's cool. Like I thought like when you said something about that, I was like, well, it kind of is cool because all the other episodes are kind of like, like you had mentioned earlier, kind of retrospective in a way.
Mhm.
And this is kind of like real time following along. So I hope this is useful to
Yeah,
all the RD2Bs. So yeah,
it
enjoy
certainly
always
is.
coming on.
Yes, and we'll keep it up. But yeah, thank you so much.